You ever had a craving for some Chick-Fil-A nuggets and sauce? Maybe that sweet lemonade that they serve? But then you look down at your phone and you realize, oh no, it's Sunday. And so now you're relegated to some inferior nuggets from Wendy's or Burger King or something like that. Why is Chick-fil-A closed on Sunday? That's a question we're going to be exploring in today's video of Deep Dives. What's up, everybody? My name is Gavin. I'm a pastor here at New Springs Church in Coral Springs, Florida, and welcome to Deep Dives, where we dive deep into issues of theology and culture. Man, I hope you're feeling me when you have this craving for some Chick-fil-A on a Sunday and you face that disappointment of recognizing it's closed, or maybe you're of the shopping variety and you like to go to Hobby Lobby and your only time is on Sunday and you can't do it. Or maybe you live in the area of Florida, you got an inkling for some barbecue, and Four Rivers is shut down for this one day of the week. Why do they do that? What is that about? Why are these Christian businesses closed on a Sunday? See, this question kind of plays out in many different ways. If you're someone, looking for some Chick-fil-A, it's a frustration that they're not open on a Sunday. Or maybe you're a kid, you're playing travel sports and your parents aren't allowing you to participate in a tournament over the weekend because you've got games on a Saturday or you've got games on a Sunday. What is all of that about, this idea of the Sabbath? Well, I think the first way to kind of explore that is understanding how the Bible is constructed in the first place. When we talk about the Bible, we're talking about 66 books comprised of the Old and New Testament. There's 39 books in the Old Testament. There's 27 books in the New. And another word for testament, or another idea, is really this idea of covenant. And so in the Bible, God makes these covenants with his people. Essentially what he's doing is he's making promises to bless them and to save them and to bring them into his presence. There was an old way that he did that, and there's a new way that he did that. Well, where we find the prescription of the Sabbath is in the old covenant, the old way that God prescribed blessings for his people. So let's dive into that a little bit and see if what God prescribed back then still is applicable to now, and whether or not I should be getting my Chick-fil-A sauce on a Sunday. First, in the Old Testament, you got a series of laws, lots of laws. The context is Israel's just been set free from slavery and bondage in Egypt. If you've seen Prince of Egypt or 10 Commandments, you're familiar with the scene. And Moses goes up high on this mountain, Mount Sinai, and God gives him these laws. And Moses takes the laws and he applies them, he expounds them, he tells the people of Israel, here's exactly how you are to follow them. And essentially, this can get muddy at times, but I think an easy way to think about this is there's three kinds of laws that exist. One is civil laws. We understand this well. Civil laws are the laws that govern a given society in a given location. The laws in the United States of America are not the same as the laws in Canada, for example. The laws in my city, Coral Springs, are not exactly the same as the laws in Fort Myers or something like that. Civil laws are laws that govern people within a given geographic location at a specific time in the world. And civil laws change all the time. As you know quite well, there used to be a civil law that you couldn't integrate. We had segregation as laws in the United States of America. We've since changed that. We used to have laws that prevented women from voting in the United States of America. Those are civil laws that changed. And so the Old Testament contains lots of civil laws that pertain to Israel at that time in the ancient days. Now, those laws we have to see whether or not they are applicable to now or not. A second kind of law is ceremonial. So now remembering that when we're dealing with Israel, we're talking about God's people, the people that he has set aside, that he has chosen to have a relationship with and bless with covenants. Israel then is called to in turn to worship God. And there are laws pertaining how to and how not to worship God. So when you think of animal sacrifices and going to the temple and what are the duties of a priest or a prophet in the Old Testament, what exactly are the tasks that these people are supposed to perform, those are ceremonial laws. So if I want to worship God, for example, during Passover, well, there's a specific kind of lamb during a specific season of the year that needed to be sacrificed, and I needed to arrive at a specific location and do specific things. Those are ceremonial laws. Well, the last kind are moral laws. Moral laws are the kinds of laws that God has written on the hearts of humanity that last for all time everywhere. For example, a law like do not murder. Now, it doesn't matter whether I live in Coral Springs, Fort Myers, America, Canada, taking the life of another human being, regardless of what the civil law says, is always wrong. To give you an example, if I took something like the movie The Purge and applied that to real life, and the civil authorities now give you permission to do things like take other people's property or take lives, God's moral law would trump that. And because God has stated that no one should take the life of another, it doesn't matter if the civil authorities give us permission to do it. It's always wrong everywhere, no matter the circumstance. So, the laws regarding the Sabbath, is that ceremonial? Are those civil? Are those moral? Well, before trying to answer that, it's important to understand that that's how the old covenant functioned. But when we get into the new covenant, these laws have different meaning or different expression, different levels of obligation on the human being seeking to follow God. Ceremonial laws are done away with in the new covenant. The civil laws of Israel also done away with in the new covenant. Now, you may wonder why that is. I think most people's approach, honestly, is, well, sacrificing lambs and bulls is kind of weird. We're modern people. We don't do that anymore. The Bible actually gives us a lot better reasoning than that. Take, for example, Hebrews chapters 7 through 10. It explains to us quite clearly that Jesus Christ presents himself as both the sacrifice and the priest who does the sacrifices. And because Christ offered himself on the cross, now his sacrifice is eternal. It lasts once and for all. That one act of obedience carries the weight, granting life to all who believe in Jesus Christ for all eternity. And so offering lambs and rams and bulls and goats, unnecessary because Jesus Christ is now our sacrifice. The same is true for civil laws. Now the geography of God's blessing of people isn't simply located to Israel. I would argue it wasn't back then either, but that's another video for another time. But Jesus Christ has now opened up salvation to the nations. The prophecies throughout the Old Testament said that Christ came to save the world. You know, John 3:16, that's held up in posters at every sporting event ever, which says, God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. God so loved the world. He loved everybody, all nations, tribes, and tongues. And so there's no more need to govern civil borders based on biblical commands, but rather the laws that remain are moral laws that are good for humanity for all time's sake. So, is the Sabbath a ceremonial law that's done away with because of Jesus' sacrifice? Is it a civil law that only applied to Israel at that time and in that space that no longer applies now? Or is it a moral law that guides humanity further? The second point. So first point is the three kinds of laws. The second point would be the function of moral law itself. So moral law has three intentions. I'll go through this quickly. The first intention of moral law is to show me how sinful that I am. So I look at the moral law and I recognize pretty quickly that I don't live up to the standards of these laws. Therefore, I need to turn to Jesus Christ to repent and ask for forgiveness. Again, for example, the fifth commandment says to honor your father and mother, and we can all think back to the time when we lied to our mom about homework or what happened in school or about eating dessert before dinner. We've all violated that law at some time. And so I look at the law, I recognize the violation in my own soul, and so I'm intended to now turn to Jesus in his perfection and that sacrifice that I mentioned before, ask him for forgiveness so that that sacrifice would cover my sins. The second purpose of the moral law is to kind of hold back and restrain evil in society. That's that idea of the purge again. Civil laws are good in the sense that it's illegal to murder. I don't want to go to jail for the rest of my life or face the death penalty. That alone, whether or not I'm religious, is a deterrent to doing evil in society. And so moral laws provide that function as well. But lastly, moral laws are also a guide to living a good life. Sometimes we miss out on this reality that God, who created and designed the world and created and designed humanity, would know how best we would function in this world. If I'm the developer of a video game, so to speak, I know which combinations of buttons, which commands, how to use the controller and the game in conjunction with one another for that game to operate best. I designed it. I know how it's supposed to work. It's the same with God, with society, and with human beings. And so his laws are actually for our good. His moral laws are good for us. It's good to not harbor hatred in my heart. It's good for me to forgive people who have wronged me. It's good for me to respect other people's property and live with integrity. It's good for me to not covet or envy other people's stuff and be content with what I already have. Those are laws that are just good for humanity. So does the Sabbath fit into that category? I believe so. I believe the New Testament gives us enough repetition of similar things to the Sabbath for us to believe that the Sabbath laws in the moral function as a good guide for our lives continue on into this day. Now, you're probably wondering, well, what about the fact that God rested on the seventh day and Jews went to synagogue on a Saturday, the seventh day of the week? It's a great question. Maybe you come from a Seventh-day Adventist background where you see, hey, the Sabbath laws pertaining to Saturday, they still apply to today, and there's no reason to do away with them. And you churches that gather on Sundays got it all wrong. Well, Revelation chapter 1, verse 10 speaks of the Lord's Day. And there are a couple other ambiguous commands throughout the New Testament that apply to gathering or giving or feasting on the first day of the week, which would be Sunday. But to add another layer of significance, and the most significant thing is the reality that Jesus Christ died on a Friday and then rose on a Sunday. And the way the Jewish calendar, or the way they counted it counted the day on which the event happened, the following day, and then the day after. That's 3 days. And so if Jesus rose on the third day, he rose on Sunday, and that's what made it become the Lord's Day. And so all over the United States of America, really all over the world, you'll find Christians gathering in some shape or form on a Sunday to worship Jesus Christ. That's why Chick-Fil-A is closed on Sunday. That's why Hobby Lobby is not open on Sunday. That's why Four Rivers is not open on Sunday. They are seeking to observe the Sabbath. Now, why continue that? Why do that? If all of this is true, that Christ died for my sins, I'm the recipient of grace anyway, then why does it matter whether I worship God on Sunday or not? The first thing I'd say to you is it kind of doesn't matter whether you do it on Sunday or not, although I do believe that should be a goal. If you work a job and you've got the option to take Sunday off, take it off. Most churches are worshiping and gathering at that time. For example, if you take your Thursday off, good luck finding a church service where you can gather with other believers. So there's a little bit of a cultural, contextual connection there that makes it that makes it pragmatic for you to observe the Sabbath, particularly on a Sunday. The next thing I'd say to that is when we talk about the Sabbath being a good guide for the Christian life, that the Bible gives us really two really great reasons. In Exodus chapter 20, we're told to rest one day in seven because God rested from his work one day in seven. He created the world in 6 days, and on the seventh day, he rested. That indicates for us that this is part of our design, that no one can just output physically and mentally continuously without taking a break. We are designed in such a way that we need that break at least one day in seven. Studies show that. Science confirms that. It's just good for your body to take a break. Secondly, we're told in Deuteronomy chapter 5 that the Sabbath is about redemption as well. That God connects his work of freeing Israel from slavery in Egypt to taking a break. So what that means is that if I take a day off, one day in seven, I can use and should use that time to reflect on the fact that my worth isn't in my work, that my value isn't in what I do or what I accomplish, that God isn't most pleased with me by how well or I can obey him, or displeased with me by how poorly I obey him, but rather my redemption is already accomplished in Jesus Christ, that Christ has already done all of the work, and so therefore I can rest knowing that it's done. That means that if I've got a project that's waiting to be finished and I feel like my boss is on my case, I can still rest and know that my worth and my value is in Jesus Christ, not in what my boss or my coworkers think of me. I should probably add the caveat: get your work done and don't have your boss mad at you. Maybe you got to use your time a little bit more wisely during the other 6 days of the week. But with that said, what is the deal with this Christian Sabbath? Well, for most of us, obeying the Lord's commands, we see the first day of the week, Sunday, as being the Lord's day, where we can gather together to worship, to be with other believers, and share in this redemption that we have in Jesus Christ. Now, let me add a word for those of you where that's just not possible. Maybe you're an NFL player. The games are on Sundays. They're always on Sundays. You really can't take a day off. You really can't take that day off, or you're just without a job. That's true for sometimes first responders, right? Ambulance, police, firefighters, nurses and doctors, hospital workers. You can't just pick that day off. Sometimes it's true for the service industry, working in restaurants and cafes and bars. It's just difficult to take off on Sundays. Is God mad at you for that? Of course not. Just find another day where it's possible for you to do that. Maybe find a church that has services on a Saturday or a Friday or something like that, where you can participate physically in person with other people to worship God, because you need it for your soul. One day in seven is good for us. That's why Chick-Fil-A's close. That's why Hobby Lobby's close. And my advice to you would be to continue that pattern, because God has designed us to take a Sabbath one day in seven. I hope that video is helpful. I'll see you guys again next week.